You always said family comes before money, Grandma. Tyler told me, his eyes shining, the day I paid off his college debt. 1 week later, my calls went straight to voicemail.
I'm Evelyn Parker.
I'm 68 years old, and I used to believe that if you loved your family enough, sacrificed enough, and gave without keeping score, they would never mistake your kindness for weakness. I was wrong. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Because what happened to me was not really about money. It was about the quiet moment an old woman realizes she has been loved only when she was useful. That morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was still dark, except for the thin blue light coming through the kitchen blinds. In Arizona, the desert does not wake gently. Even before the sun rises, you can feel the heat waiting outside the glass, pressed against the windows like an animal. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee growing cold beside my hand. The bank envelope lay in front of me. $38,400. I had written the number down 3 times on the back of an old grocery receipt because my hand kept trembling. It was nearly everything Harold and I had saved after 43 years of marriage. Not the retirement money, not the house, but the cushion, the safety. The little pile we told ourselves was for emergencies, plumbing disasters, medical bills, a roof that might need replacing. Harold used to call it our sleep-at-night money. My Harold had been gone for almost 4 years by then, but I still heard him in that kitchen. Sometimes in the tick of the grandfather clock. Sometimes in the way the old refrigerator hummed before shutting off. Sometimes in the empty chair across from mine. He would sit there on Sunday mornings with his reading glasses low on his nose, circling grocery coupons he knew we would never use. Money should move through family like blood through veins, he used to say. What good is it if it dies sitting still? I believed him. Maybe too much. Tyler was my only grandson. 19 years old, halfway through his sophomore year at Arizona State, studying business and communications. He had Harold's blue eyes and Daniel's smile before Daniel learned to use that smile carefully, only when he wanted something softened before asking for it. Tyler had called me 3 weeks earlier, voice low and embarrassed. Grandma, I didn't want to worry you. That sentence alone was enough to make my heart open. He told me about tuition balances, student loans, interest rates, late fees, and some deadline that would affect his registration. Daniel later confirmed it in his vague way. Mom, it's just a rough patch, my son said. Tyler's trying hard. We're handling what we can. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, sent a text that evening. You know how much Tyler adores you. We hate even bringing this up. I stared at that message for a long time. At 68, you learn that people often say they hate asking right before they ask. But I wanted to help. More than that, I wanted to matter. Widowhood does strange things to a woman. It does not only take your husband. It takes the version of yourself who is witnessed every day. After Harold died, no one noticed whether I slept badly, whether I ate dinner standing at the sink, whether I left my reading glasses in the laundry room or forgot why I had walked into the hallway. Daniel called on Sundays, usually while driving somewhere. Melissa sent photos. Tyler texted when he remembered. And I told myself that was enough. So that morning, when I drove to the bank, I wore the pale blue blouse Harold liked, the one he said made my eyes look young. I parked under a mesquite tree and sat in the car for a minute with both hands on the steering wheel. The bank smelled like carpet cleaner and coffee from a machine near the waiting area. A young mother bounced a baby on her hip near the teller line. An older man argued softly about a check. The world kept moving in its ordinary way while I prepared to give away the last large thing Harold and I had built together. The woman at the desk was kind. Her name tag said Andrea. Your grandson is very lucky, she said when the transfer was complete. I looked down at the receipt. $38,400. Gone from my account. Sent to the education payment account Daniel had provided. I should have felt panic. Instead, I felt light. I'm the lucky one, I told Andrea. Family is everything. I remember exactly how those words sounded. Proud. Tender. Foolish. That evening, Daniel and Melissa invited me over for dinner. Their house sat in a newer gated community 20 miles north of mine, All white stucco walls, oversized windows, and a front yard arranged with decorative rocks that never looked touched by weather. Beautiful, yes, but not warm. Not like my house, where the hallway floor creaked in 3 places and Harold's old gardening gloves still hung beside the garage door. Melissa opened the door wearing cream-colored linen pants and one of those expensive sweaters tied over her shoulders like women in magazines. "Evelyn," she said, arms already open. She never called me Mom unless other people were listening. "Tyler's been emotional all afternoon. You have no idea what this means to him." Her perfume reached me before her hug did. Something floral and sharp. Inside, the dining room looked staged. Candles burning. Cloth napkins folded into neat triangles. Wine glasses polished so brightly they caught the chandelier light. There were 4 place settings at the table. For one brief second, that little detail warmed me. They had made a place for me. Tyler came out of the kitchen and stopped when he saw me. His face changed in a way that made my throat tighten. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to run across my backyard barefoot, dripping pool water across the patio, yelling, "Grandma, watch this." He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me. "Grandma," he whispered into my shoulder, "I swear I'm going to make you proud." I closed my eyes. At my age, you learn to hold on to affection an extra second because you never know when it will come again. Daniel poured me a glass of Chardonnay and lifted his own. "To Mom," he said, "the heart of this family." I looked at my son across the table. Daniel was 46 then, gray at the temples, expensive watch, tired eyes. He had grown into a man who always looked busy, even sitting still.
I
Searched his face for Harold and found only pieces.
The brow.
The hands. The little crease near his mouth when he was uncomfortable. Melissa reached for her phone. "Wait, everybody stay like that," she said. "This is beautiful." Tyler leaned close to me. Daniel raised his glass again. Melissa snapped 3 photos. A few minutes later, she posted one online. Blessed beyond words. Family takes care of family. During dinner, Tyler talked about internships and networking events and maybe studying abroad if things worked out. Melissa touched his arm proudly each time he spoke. Daniel discussed interest rates, the housing market, and how hard young people had it now. I listened. I smiled. I let myself feel useful. When dessert came, Melissa brought out a lemon cake from my favorite bakery downtown. "You deserve to celebrate too," she said. The cake was placed in front of me, but no one handed me the knife. That is a small thing. Too small to mention. But I noticed it. Melissa cut the first slice for Tyler, then Daniel, then herself. Mine came last, thinner than the others. The frosting slightly scraped where the knife had dragged. I told myself not to be silly. Tyler reached over and squeezed my hand. "Seriously, Grandma, I don't even know how to thank you." I laughed softly. "Call me once in a while. That's enough." Everyone chuckled. A polite family laugh. The kind that makes a truthful sentence disappear. Later, as Daniel walked me to the door, Melissa called from behind us, "Evelyn, don't forget to send me that receipt when you get a chance. Just for our records." Daniel's hand tightened briefly on the doorframe. I turned. "The bank receipt?" "Oh, nothing urgent," she said brightly. "It's just easier to keep everything organized." Tyler was already looking down at his phone. I said I would send it, because families should not require suspicion. That night, I drove home beneath a sky full of desert stars. My headlights swept across familiar roads, past Walgreens, the dry cleaner, the little church where Harold and I once attended a Christmas concert because Tyler was singing in the children's choir. At a red light, I looked at my phone in the cup holder. Melissa had tagged me in the photo. There I was, smiling beside my grandson. The heart of the family. I sat in my driveway for several minutes after I got home. The house waited in darkness. The porch light flickered once before settling. Harold had always meant to fix that fixture, then life got busy, then life ended. Inside, I placed my purse on the kitchen counter and stood in the silence. No television. No footsteps. No one asking how it went. I opened the refrigerator, looked at the half-empty carton of eggs, the blood pressure medication bottle beside the butter dish, and closed it again. Then I went to bed feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time since Harold died, I felt needed. The next morning, I texted Tyler. "Proud of you, sweetheart." No response came. I told myself he was sleeping late. College boys slept late. At lunchtime, I called him while reheating leftover soup. It rang 4 times. Then voicemail. "Hey, it's Tyler. Leave a message." His recorded voice was cheerful, careless, young. I smiled anyway. "Just checking in. Love you." By evening, still nothing. The next day, I called again. Straight to voicemail. I texted Daniel. "Is Tyler busy with classes?" Haven't heard from him. 6 hours later, my son replied. "Probably studying." Melissa did not answer at all. The silence did not frighten me at first. It confused me. There is a difference.
Fear knows what it is looking at.
Confusion keeps making excuses. 3 days passed. Then 4. I carried my phone from room to room like a woman carrying a glass of water through a house fire. Into the laundry room. Onto the back patio. Beside the bathtub, while steam clouded the mirror. Every buzz made my chest tighten. Usually it was spam. Or the pharmacy. Or a reminder from my dentist. On the 7th morning, I sat again at the kitchen table. Same cup of black coffee. Same pale Arizona light crossing the tile floor. Only this time, the bank envelope was gone. I opened Facebook. Melissa had posted photos from the night before. Tyler smiling at a rooftop restaurant in Scottsdale. Daniel holding steaks near an outdoor grill. Melissa leaning against him with a glass of wine. The caption read, "Fresh beginnings with the people who matter most." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I looked at my call log. No missed calls. No return messages. Nothing. The coffee beside me had gone cold. That was when I understood something I was not yet ready to say out loud. Paying off Tyler's debt had not brought me closer to my family. It had simply finished a transaction they were waiting for me to complete. For the first few days, I gave them mercy inside my own mind. That is something mothers do without realizing it. We do not only defend our children to other people, we defend them to ourselves. Tyler was busy. Daniel was stressed. Melissa was never good at answering messages unless she had a reason. Young people lived on their phones but somehow still forgot to call. Maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe the dinner had meant more to me because my life had become smaller after Harold died. I repeated these explanations every morning while the coffee brewed. The machine gurgled and hissed on the counter, filling the kitchen with the bitter smell Harold used to love. I still made enough for 2 cups most mornings, even though I only drank 1. Habit is grief with muscle memory. My phone stayed beside my plate, screen facing upward, volume turned all the way on. Every vibration sent a small shock through me. A weather alert, a pharmacy reminder, a message from my Medicare plan. Never Tyler. Never Daniel calling just to ask how I was. Never Melissa saying, "Evelyn, come over Sunday. We miss you." By the 4th day, the house had begun to feel too quiet again. Not peaceful.
Watched.
As if every room had noticed I was waiting. I tried to fill the silence with chores. I wiped the kitchen counters twice. I folded towels that were already folded. I cleaned out the drawer beside the stove where Harold used to toss batteries, old keys, rubber bands, and screws he claimed he would need someday. At the very back of that drawer, I found one of Tyler's old school pictures from 5th grade. He was smiling with one front tooth slightly crooked, wearing a blue polo shirt I had ironed because Melissa said she did not have time that morning. I held the picture longer than I meant to. Then I placed it on the counter beside my coffee. That was how the day started. With a little boy's old smile staring up at me while the grown version of him ignored my calls. On Tuesday afternoon, I decided to drive to campus. I did not call Daniel first. I did not text Melissa. I told myself it would be sweet, spontaneous, grandmotherly. The kind of thing a young man might complain about but secretly appreciate. Before leaving, I stood in front of the hallway mirror and brushed my silver hair into place. I put on lipstick, then wiped some of it off because it looked too bright for daytime. I changed from my house shoes into sandals with a low heel. Then I took my purse, locked the front door, and drove toward Tempe under a white-hot sky. On the way, I stopped at the sandwich shop Tyler used to love in high school. Turkey avocado on sourdough. Extra pickles.
No onions.
I still remembered. That is another thing older women carry. Everyone's preferences. We remember who hates mustard, who likes lemon in iced tea, who needs the crust cut off, who once mentioned loving peach cobbler 15 years ago. We remember because feeding people was one of the ways we were allowed to love them. The sandwich was wrapped in brown paper, warm against my palm. I set it carefully on the passenger seat, as if it were something fragile. Traffic crawled near Tempe Marketplace. Students crossed streets in groups, laughing, holding iced coffees, wearing backpacks slung over one shoulder. They looked so young it almost hurt to see them. When I reached the business building, I parked in a visitor lot that cost $8 for 1 hour. $8 to sit and hope your grandson was happy to see you. I texted him, "I'm outside your building, sweetheart. Brought lunch." Then I sat on a shaded bench near the entrance with a sandwich in my lap. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Students came and went. A girl in a maroon ASU sweatshirt sat near me and called her mother. "Yeah, Mom, I ate," she said impatiently. "I promise." I looked away because the sound of that small irritation made my throat tighten. Even impatience can be a form of closeness. Someone was calling.
Someone was
answering. After 27 minutes, my phone lit up. "Sorry, Grandma. In study group. Rain check. No heart. No love you. No thank you for coming." I stared at the message until the letters blurred slightly. Then I looked up. Across the walkway, near the glass doors, I saw Tyler. He was with 2 boys and a young woman with dark hair pulled into a ponytail. He was laughing at something one of them said. His backpack hung from one shoulder. In his hand was a plastic cup from the coffee shop inside the building. For a second, I thought he had not seen me. Then his eyes moved in my direction.
He saw me.
I know he did. His smile faltered just a little. Not enough for the others to notice. Then he looked away. Not quickly. Carefully. As if not seeing me was something he had chosen. I sat very still. The sandwich grew heavy in my lap. The girl beside him asked something, and Tyler laughed again, louder this time. He turned his body slightly, angling himself away from me. The group walked down the path toward the parking garage. He never came over. He never waved. My phone remained silent in my hand. That was the first time the embarrassment felt physical. Heat moved up my neck. My fingers tightened around the sandwich wrapper until the paper wrinkled loudly. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to call his name. I wanted to force him to look at me in front of his friends and remember that the old woman on the bench had just paid enough money to change the next several years of his life. But I did not. Humiliation has a way of making you smaller before it makes you angry. I waited until they disappeared around the corner. Then I walked to the trash can beside the bench and dropped the untouched sandwich inside. On the drive home, I kept both hands on the steering wheel. No radio. No air conditioning for the first 10 minutes because I forgot to turn it on. The heat inside the car rose around me, and still I drove quietly, as if sudden movement might make the truth real. That night, I ate frozen lasagna standing at the kitchen counter. I did not bother using a plate. The local news played in the living room, voices talking. About traffic, school board meetings, rising grocery prices. Ordinary problems. Problems with names. Halfway through dinner, Facebook suggested new photos from Melissa's account. I should not have clicked, but loneliness makes you touch the stove just to confirm it is hot. There they were. Daniel smiling beside a fire pit. Tyler holding concert tickets. Melissa posing under string lights at a rooftop restaurant in Scottsdale, one hand resting on Daniel's chest like a woman whose life had arranged itself exactly as she wanted. The caption read, "Family weekends are the best medicine." Family. I stood there with a fork in my hand, lasagna cooling in front of me. No one had invited me. No one had even pretended to. Under the photo, one of Melissa's friends commented, "Such a beautiful family." Melissa replied, "We keep our circles small and peaceful." Small. Peaceful. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I set the fork down. The house seemed to change shape around me. The kitchen counters looked longer. The hallway darker. Harold's recliner in the living room sat angled toward the television, its worn armrest still slightly flattened where his hand used to rest. I walked over and stood beside it. Some nights I still imagined him sitting there, one ankle crossed over the other, glasses low on his nose. He would have seen through this sooner. That thought hurt more than the photos. Harold had been gentle, but he was never blind. Years earlier, when Daniel asked to borrow $15,000 for a business idea that lasted less than 4 months, Harold had said, "Help him if you want, Evie. But don't confuse a handout with a relationship." I had scolded him. "He's our son." Harold only looked at me with tired kindness. "Yes," he said. "That's why it's harder to admit when he's taking advantage." Back then, I thought Harold was being too stern. Now, standing beside his empty chair, I wondered how many truths I had dismissed because they came from a man who loved me enough to worry. The next few days passed in small disappointments. Tyler stopped liking my comments online. Daniel stopped asking about my arthritis. Melissa viewed my messages without replying. I noticed the little gray word seen beneath my texts and began to hate it.
Seen.
Not answered.
Seen.
Not valued.
Seen.
Not wanted. One afternoon, I opened the hall closet to put away towels and found the old folding card table Harold and I used for family holidays. Thanksgiving pies. Christmas puzzles. Tyler's science fair project in 7th grade. I pulled it out halfway, then stopped. The metal legs scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet hallway. I remembered last Thanksgiving at Daniel's house. Melissa had seated me at the corner of the table near the kitchen entrance, not beside Tyler, not near Daniel, but close enough to get up and help if anyone needed more rolls. When Tyler's girlfriend's parents arrived unexpectedly, Melissa had smiled and said, "Evelyn, you don't mind scooting over to the breakfast bar, do you? We're just short one chair." Just short one chair. I had carried my plate to the kitchen counter and eaten beside the coffee maker while everyone laughed in the dining room. At the time, I told myself it was practical. Now I understood that practical is often the costume humiliation wears when family wants you not to complain. Friday morning, Daniel finally called. I answered so quickly I nearly dropped the phone. "Hey, Mom," he said. Traffic noise filled the background. "Just checking in." Relief came first. That embarrassed me later. I was beginning to wonder if everyone forgot about me. I joked softly. There was a pause. Not regret. Not concern. Just discomfort. "Yeah, things have been crazy over here." I saw the photos from Scottsdale. I said before I could stop myself. Another pause. Shorter this time.
Oh.
Yeah. Melissa's friends had extra tickets to that restaurant event. Last-minute thing. With Tyler? "Mom," he said, his voice tightening slightly, "he's 19. You can't expect him to report every meal to you." The words landed quietly. Not loud enough to be called cruel. Sharp enough to leave a mark. "I didn't say that," I replied. I know," he sighed. "It's just everybody's adjusting. Tyler's got a lot going on. Melissa's got a lot going on. I've got work. We're all trying to keep things balanced." Balanced. Another useful word. A word that sounded responsible while meaning I had become weight on the wrong side of the scale. I looked out the kitchen window at Harold's rose bushes trembling slightly in the hot wind. "Well," I said, "I miss you all." Daniel did not answer right away. Then he cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, Melissa, and I wanted to ask you something about your house. Nothing urgent. We'll talk later." My house.
Yeah.
Just future planning. Long-term stuff. "What kind of future planning?" He exhaled, impatient now. "Not over the phone. We'll talk when everyone's less emotional." Everyone.
He meant me.
The call ended less than 3 minutes after it began. I sat with the phone in my lap, listening to the empty line until the screen went dark. After Daniel mentioned my house, the silence between us changed. It no longer felt accidental. It felt organized. That evening, I found myself walking room to room with no purpose. The guest room still had Tyler's old swim towel folded in the closet, faded blue with sharks on it. The office smelled faintly of paper and dust. In the bedroom, Harold's reading glasses remained in the top drawer of his nightstand because I had never found the courage to move them. I touched them once, then closed the drawer. In the bathroom, my medication bottles stood beside the sink in a neat row. Blood pressure, arthritis,
Vitamin D.
the ordinary inventory of aging. I looked at myself in the mirror. Silver hair, fine lines, a face that still knew how to look composed even when something inside it was beginning to fracture. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If I stopped giving, who would still come looking for me? The house gave no answer. Only the clock in the hallway, ticking steadily into the silence. The next few days were the same. Small disappointments stacked quietly, almost imperceptibly, until the weight became noticeable. Tyler ignored messages. Daniel stopped asking about my arthritis. Melissa read texts without responding. I began to notice the little gray seen beneath my messages and came to hate it.
Seen.
Not answered.
Seen.
Not wanted.
Seen.
Forgotten. I began replaying old moments in my mind. Each one became a thread, and slowly, a pattern emerged. Melissa asking whether I had considered simplifying my life after Harold died. Daniel casually mentioning how high my property taxes must be this year. Tyler joking last Christmas that I lived alone in a mansion for one person. At the time, I laughed, as mothers do. We smooth things over. We pretend comments do not sting. But now, those memories sat differently in my chest. Sharp, careful, intentional. Saturday morning arrived with dry heat pressing against the windows before 9 o'clock. I watered the rose bushes Harold planted years ago along the front walkway. Neighbors walked past with their dogs, oblivious to the world inside my house that was quietly shrinking. Across the street, a young couple loaded suitcases into a large SUV while their little girl skipped around holding a stuffed rabbit. Normal life moved everywhere else, while my life felt like it was folding inward. I drove to Safeway for few items I didn't truly need. Sometimes older people shop just to hear a human voice. The cashier asked whether I wanted paper or plastic, and I answered automatically, giving slightly too much enthusiasm, almost as if my presence could be acknowledged. A small, ordinary conversation felt almost miraculous. On my way home, my phone buzzed. Melissa. My heart lifted before I could stop it.
Isuart, Iansuarat Kikli.
Her voice sounded overly bright, polished in a way that women use when they are selling themselves to others. Evelyn, we were just talking about you. Daniel, and I think you deserve to enjoy life more. You've worked hard for so many years. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. That's kind of you to say. We just worry about you being alone in such a large house, she continued gently. There are some beautiful retirement communities near Scottsdale. Pools, restaurants, activities every day. It could be really fun for you.
Fun.
The word landed cold and hollow. I stared at the red traffic light ahead of me. Heat shimmered above the asphalt. Harold and I had built this house 31 years ago. We had painted every room ourselves, measured every cabinet twice, because Harold never trusted contractors. To leave it behind felt like erasing half my life. I am doing just fine here, I said carefully. Melissa laughed softly, but tension threaded beneath it. Of course you are. We just want to make sure everything is manageable long-term. Everything. A harmless word. A dangerous one when money and property are involved. That evening, I opened Facebook again against my better judgment. Tyler had posted graduation photos from a business networking event downtown. Daniel stood beside him proudly in a navy blazer. Melissa commented underneath, "So proud of the future you are building together." Together. Family. New chapter. Fresh start. Words designed to sound warm while quietly excluding someone else. I clicked through more pictures until one froze me. Tyler standing in my backyard beside the pool last weekend. I recognized the patio furniture immediately. They had all been there while I sat alone at home, waiting for a call back. The timestamp showed Sunday afternoon. The same Sunday, I left Tyler a voicemail asking whether he wanted to meet for lunch. I sat motionless in front of the glowing screen. The grandfather clock ticked steadily behind me. Something inside me settled into place. Not heartbreak exactly. Something colder.
Clearer.
I realized I was no longer being forgotten. I was being managed. 2 days later, my friend Grace Whitmore invited me to lunch at the country club where she played bridge every Thursday. Grace and I had known each other since our boys played Little League together more than 30 years ago. At 67, Grace still wore bright lipstick, drove fast, and spoke with the confidence of someone who stopped worrying about pleasing people long ago. I almost canceled that morning. Sleep had been restless. Thoughts circled endlessly. Was I imagining it? Was grief making me overly sensitive? Older women are taught to doubt themselves before doubting their families. But something pushed me out the door. The country club restaurant overlooked the golf course, so green it looked almost artificial against the dry Arizona hills. Ceiling fans turned lazily above polished wooden tables. Older couples lingered over iced tea and Cobb salads. Grace waved me over. "You look tired," she said after hugging me. "I'm fine," I answered automatically. Her eyes lingered on me, searching beneath my calm. Halfway through lunch, she became unusually quiet, stirred her iced tea slowly.
Finally, she sighed.
"Evelyn, there's something I need to tell you. You probably won't like it." A heaviness settled in my stomach. "What is it?" Grace glanced around carefully before lowering her voice. "Melissa was here last weekend with 2 women from her neighborhood. I was sitting 3 tables behind them. My fingers tightened around my napkin. And..." Grace hesitated. For the first time in decades, she seemed uncertain about how much truth another woman could survive hearing. They were talking about Tyler's debt being paid off. One of the women asked how your family managed it so quickly.
"I ser det her."
Melissa laughed. Grace continued. "Evelyn finally served a purpose." The sounds of the restaurant disappeared around me. Clinking glasses. Low conversation. Piano music from ceiling speakers. Everything dulled beneath the pressure building inside my chest. Grace kept speaking carefully, as if walking on thin ice. One woman joked that Tyler must feel grateful. Melissa said, "Please. Old people love spending money if it makes them feel important." I looked down at my untouched salad, while heat crawled up my neck. Not because I was angry. Not yet. Because deep down, some part of me recognized the sentence as true. Not her cruelty. My own weakness. Harold used to warn me, never let people treat your generosity like a monthly subscription. Back then, I defended my son immediately. Mothers always do. Grace reached across the table and placed her hand gently over mine. "I almost didn't tell you," she admitted, "but you deserve to know." Outside the clubhouse windows, a golf cart rolled past beneath bright afternoon sunlight. Everything looked calm and ordinary while something painful shifted permanently inside me. That evening, I drove home from the country club with the radio turned off. The Arizona sun hung low over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. Traffic moved steadily around me. Minivans, pickup trucks, young couples heading to dinner, teenagers laughing through open windows. Normal lives, normal families. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. Melissa's words echoed through my mind. Evelyn finally served a purpose. Not because they were shocking, because they explained too much. The ignored messages, the sudden distance, the carefully timed concern about my house, the retirement communities, the silence after the tuition payment. By the time I pulled into my driveway, something had changed. Not outside, inside. The confusion was beginning to disappear. Confusion hurts. Clarity hurts more. Inside the house, the familiar scent of old wood and lemon furniture polish greeted me. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. Evening sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors. Harold had refinished himself nearly 15 years earlier. I stood quietly in the living room. For a moment, I could almost see him. Harold sitting in his recliner, reading glasses low on his nose. A newspaper folded in his lap, one ankle resting on the opposite knee. The image arrived, so suddenly it stole my breath. "You were right," I whispered. The empty room gave no answer. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake staring at the ceiling while memories surfaced one after another. Not dramatic memories. Small ones. The dangerous kind. The kind you ignore until enough of them gather together. I remembered Thanksgiving 2 years earlier. Melissa had insisted everyone celebrate at her house. I arrived carrying 2 homemade pies and a casserole dish. When I walked into the dining room, every seat already had a name card. Everyone except me. Melissa laughed when she noticed. Oh, goodness. I forgot one. Forgot. Such a useful word. She pulled a chair from the kitchen and placed it near the end of the table beside the doorway. Not with the family. Near the doorway. Close enough to serve. Far enough to disappear. At the time, I told myself it was an accident. Now I wasn't so sure. Another memory surfaced. Tyler's high school graduation. The family gathered afterward for photos. Melissa arranged. Everyone carefully. Parents in the center. Friends around them. Tyler's girlfriend beside him. Then someone handed me a camera. Can you take one for us, Evelyn? I had. And suddenly I realized something.
I wasn't in a single photo from that day.
Not one. I spent years excusing things because each incident seemed too small to matter. Individually, they were harmless. Together, they formed a pattern. I finally fell asleep sometime after 2 a.m. The next day was Friday. I spent most of it cleaning, not because the house needed it, because movement felt easier than thinking. Around noon, I opened the closet in the spare bedroom. Inside sat dozens of old photo albums. Heavy leather-bound books containing 40 years of family history. I carried 3 of them downstairs and spread them across the dining room table. Page after page. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. School events. Family vacations. Harold teaching Tyler how to fish. Daniel learning to ride a bicycle. Melissa smiling on the day she married into our family. At first, the photos brought comfort. Then something else. A strange realization. Melissa's expression changed over the years. Not dramatically. Gradually. In early photos, she leaned toward the family.
Toward me.
Toward Harold. Later photos felt different. Subtle. Hard to explain. As though she was no longer joining the family. She was positioning herself inside it. A thought occurred to me. When exactly had she started talking about my house? I closed the album. And suddenly I knew. The summer after Harold died. That first year. The hardest year. The year I could barely walk into our bedroom without crying. The year every room felt haunted. That was when Melissa started mentioning downsizing. Retirement communities. Property values. Maintenance costs. At the time, I believed she was concerned. Now I wondered if she had simply recognized an opportunity. The realization made my stomach tighten. Around 3 o'clock, I found myself standing in Harold's old office. Most of the room remained untouched.
His desk.
His filing cabinets. The bookshelf he built himself. Dust floated through shafts of afternoon sunlight. I opened the bottom.
Filing cabinet.
Inside sat decades of paperwork. Insurance records. Tax returns. Investment statements. Property documents. Most people would find it boring. Harold would have called it peace of mind. I spent the next hour sorting through folders. Mostly out of curiosity. Partly because I needed something to focus on. Eventually, I found a folder labeled Family Financial Assistance. Of course, Harold had labeled it. Harold labeled everything. Inside sat records stretching back nearly 20 years.
Loans. Gifts.
College tuition. Emergency expenses. Checks written to Daniel. Several much larger than I remembered. I sat down slowly. The total surprised me. Not because it was enormous. Because I had forgotten so much of it. A down payment during Daniel's first home purchase. Business help during a recession. Credit card debt after Tyler was born. Unexpected medical bills. Legal fees. Car repairs. Thousands upon thousands of dollars. Always given willingly. Always with love. I turned another page. Then another. And another. Something cold settled into my chest. The assistance flowed almost entirely one direction.
Toward them.
Rarely back. Not financially. Not emotionally.
Not even with time.
I stared at the records for several minutes. Then I noticed something tucked between two folders. A yellow sticky note in Harold's handwriting. His handwriting was impossible to mistake. Strong.
Neat.
Deliberate. Only 6 words appeared on the paper. Love them. But watch patterns carefully. I froze. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the street. The sound drifted faintly through the window. I sat there staring at those 6 words. Harold wrote them years before his death. Maybe 10 years. Maybe more. I remembered the argument that followed. Daniel had borrowed money again. I defended him. Harold remained unconvinced. People reveal themselves through patterns, Evie. I hated hearing that, because patterns require honesty, and honesty can threaten hope. I folded the sticky note carefully and placed it inside my pocket. That evening, I called Grace. She answered on the second ring. "How are you holding up?" she asked immediately. I laughed.
Softly.
Apparently not very well. Grace remained silent, waiting. Good friends know when not to interrupt. I think Harold saw this years ago. Another pause. What do you mean? I looked around the quiet kitchen. The empty chair. The cooling coffee. The untouched fruit bowl. The silence. I think I've spent years confusing being needed with being loved. Grace sighed. A long, sad sound. Most mothers do. After we hung up, I sat outside on the back patio. The desert air had finally cooled. Pool lights reflected softly against the water. Crickets chirped somewhere beyond the fence. For the first time in weeks, I stopped waiting for my phone to ring. No checking messages.
No refreshing Facebook.
No staring at unanswered texts. Just silence. Real silence. And inside that silence, another memory surfaced. A conversation from 6 months earlier. Melissa standing near the pool during a family barbecue, wine glass in hand,
Smiling.
looking around the backyard. This place must be worth a fortune now. At the time, I barely noticed. Now I remembered every detail, the exact words, the exact smile, the exact way Daniel had looked away afterward, as if he didn't want to participate, but didn't want to stop it either. That memory stayed with me all night. The next morning, I woke before dawn, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time since paying Tyler's debt, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Not, why are they doing this? But, how long have they been doing this? The difference terrified me, because one possibility suggested a recent misunderstanding. The other suggested a plan. And deep down, I was beginning to fear I already knew the answer. The question followed me everywhere. How long have they been doing this? Not while I made coffee. Not while I watered Harold's roses. Not while I folded laundry or watched the evening news. It sat quietly behind every thought. Waiting. Growing. I stopped checking Facebook as often after that. Not because it hurt less. Because I had started noticing things I could not unsee. Once you recognize a pattern, every new piece of evidence feels less surprising and more confirming. That frightened me. Not because I was discovering something new, because I was realizing how much I had ignored. The following Tuesday, I received an invitation. It arrived by email. Tyler's Business Leadership Recognition Ceremony. Students, faculty, and family welcome. The event would take place Friday evening at a hotel ballroom in downtown Phoenix. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen. Family welcome. I waited. No call came. No text. No invitation from Tyler himself. Nothing. 3 days passed. Still nothing. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, I texted him. Saw something about your recognition ceremony. Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. His reply came almost instantly. Thanks, Grandma. Nothing else. No. Hope you'll come. No. Would love to see you there. Just 2 words. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I closed my phone. Friday arrived unusually hot for October. I spent too much time getting ready. The pale blue blouse. Pearl earrings. A little lipstick. The same careful preparations women make when they want to believe they still matter. The ballroom occupied the second floor of an upscale hotel downtown. When I arrived, People stood in clusters near the entrance. Parents, grandparents, professors, students in suits. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone seemed expected. I signed a guest sheet and stepped inside. The room glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Round tables covered in white linens filled the space. Large screens displayed student photographs. Music drifted softly from hidden speakers. I looked around and immediately saw Daniel, Melissa, Tyler, all seated together near the front. There was an empty chair beside them. Relief washed through me. For one brief moment, I thought maybe I had been wrong. Maybe they had saved me a seat. Maybe I was still part of this. I walked toward the table. Then I saw a younger couple approach from the opposite side. Tyler stood immediately, smiling,
Warm.
confident. He pulled out the empty chair. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds," he said. "Glad you made it." The chair wasn't for me. It was for the parents of a professor who had helped him secure an internship. I stopped walking, only for a second, long enough to understand, sure enough that nobody noticed, or pretended not to. Melissa finally spotted me.
Oh.
Just one word.
Oh.
Then she smiled. The polite smile people use when someone arrives unexpectedly. "Evelyn." Not Mom. Not Evelyn. "We're so happy you're here." Just Evelyn. Daniel shifted awkwardly in his seat. Tyler looked surprised. Not happy.
Surprised.
As though my presence required explanation. "You came." The sentence landed harder than he intended. I smiled anyway. "Family welcome, remember?" Nobody answered. Melissa glanced around the crowded ballroom. "Looks like they added extra seating near the back." Near the back. I looked around. Dozens of empty chairs. Just not at their table. The humiliation was small. Almost invisible. Which somehow made it worse.
No argument. No confrontation.
No scene. Just a quiet reminder that my place had already been reassigned. I nodded. "That's okay." Then I carried my purse toward a table near the rear wall. Alone. From there, I watched the ceremony begin. Student after student crossed the stage. Families applauded. Parents took photographs. Grandparents cried. The woman seated beside me dabbed her eyes every few minutes. "My grandson is first-generation college," she whispered proudly. I smiled. "He must be very special." "He is." The answer came, without hesitation, without conditions, without transactions. I looked toward Tyler, and suddenly remembered when he was 8 years old. A summer afternoon. Swimming in my pool. Harold teaching him chess beneath the patio umbrella. The boy kept losing, growing frustrated. Finally, Harold leaned forward and said, "Being smart isn't the same as being wise." Tyler rolled his eyes dramatically. "What does that even mean?" Harold laughed. "It means the smartest person in the room isn't always the best person in the room." Back then, Tyler listened. Back then, he adored Harold. Back then, family still felt simple. Applause pulled me back to the present. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. The room erupted. He walked confidently across the stage. Handsome, successful, admired. I felt pride anyway. Real pride. That was the tragedy of motherhood and grandmotherhood. Love often survives disappointment, even when it shouldn't. The presenter began reading his accomplishments. Academic honors, leadership programs, internships, community involvement. The audience applauded repeatedly. Then came the final sentence. Tyler Parker's success reflects years of hard work and strong family support. I looked automatically toward Daniel and Melissa, both smiling proudly, neither looking in my direction. Nobody mentioned the grandmother who had just emptied most of her savings to keep his education alive. Nobody had to. Recognition is not something people forget accidentally. It is something they choose not to give. After the ceremony, guests gathered for refreshments. I considered leaving immediately. Then Tyler approached. For a moment, hope stirred again. Maybe he wanted to thank me. Maybe he wanted to talk. Maybe, Grandma. He smiled awkwardly. "Glad you made it." I waited. Nothing followed.
No hug. No gratitude. No acknowledgement.
Just polite conversation. The kind strangers make at airports. "You did great." Thanks. Harold would have been proud.
Yeah.
Silence. Then Tyler glanced over my shoulder, distracted, searching for someone else. His friends. His future. Anywhere but here. A young woman waved from across the room. The same girl from campus.
Dark ponytail.
Bright smile. Tyler's face lit up immediately. The transformation was instant, effortless. The version of warmth I had been begging to see for weeks. I should go say hi. Of course. I nodded. Go ahead. See you later, Grandma. He disappeared before I could answer. I stood there holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold, alone in a crowded ballroom, watching my grandson move easily through a world where I no longer seemed to fit. That was when another voice interrupted my thoughts. Evelyn. I turned. An older man stood behind me. Gray hair. Navy blazer. Familiar face. It took several seconds to place him. Then I remembered. Robert Chambers. One of Harold's longtime business friends. We hadn't seen each other in years. Evelyn. His smile faded as he studied my expression. You okay? The question nearly broke something inside me. Because it was genuine. Not strategic. Not rehearsed. Genuine.
Ai fine.
The automatic answer appeared before I could stop it. Robert raised one eyebrow. Harold used to hate that answer.
Assad lef escaped me.
That sounds like him. Robert glanced toward Daniel's table. Then back at me. His expression changed slightly. Carefully. Deliberately. Evelyn. His voice lowered. There may be something you should know. My stomach tightened immediately. Not fear. Instinct. The same instinct that had been waking me before sunrise for weeks. What is it? Robert hesitated, then exhaled slowly. About 3 months ago, I had lunch with Daniel. Every nerve in my body seemed to sharpen. And Robert looked uncomfortable. As I recall, he asked several questions about property transfers after retirement. I remained perfectly still. He specifically mentioned your house. The ballroom suddenly felt louder. Voices. Music. Laughter. Glasses clinking. All distant. All irrelevant. Only Robert's next words mattered. He seemed very interested in how quickly elderly homeowners typically move into assisted living arrangements. The paper coffee cup trembled slightly in my hand. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me. Robert studied my face. Evelyn. Yes. I assumed you knew. The silence between us lasted several seconds. Then I finally answered.
No.
For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something stronger than sadness. Stronger than loneliness. Stronger than betrayal. I felt the first small spark of certainty. Because if Daniel was discussing my house months before the tuition payment, then none of this had started with Tyler's debt. It had started long before that. And whatever game they were playing, I had only just discovered the opening move. I did not tell Robert everything. Not there. Not in the middle of a ballroom full of applause, laughter, and proud families taking photographs. I simply thanked him. Then I stood there for another few minutes pretending to watch the celebration, while my mind replayed his words again and again. 3 months ago. Not last week. Not after the tuition payment. Not after Melissa mentioned retirement communities. 3 months ago. Daniel had already been asking questions about elderly homeowners, about property transfers, about assisted living, about my house. My house. The one Harold and I spent 31 years paying for. The one where Daniel took his first steps. The one where Tyler learned to swim. The one where every doorway still carried tiny pencil marks recording a grandson's height through the years. Suddenly, the timeline changed. This was not a reaction. It was preparation. And that realization frightened me more than anything else. Because preparation requires intention. The drive home felt longer than usual. Phoenix traffic crawled beneath the orange glow of sunset while my thoughts moved in circles. At one red light, I found myself staring at the steering wheel. The leather was worn smooth where Harold's hands used to rest when we traveled together. He always drove. Always. Even after retirement. Even after his first heart scare. You're a terrible passenger. I used to tease. He would grin. And you're a terrible driver. Those little arguments felt priceless now. Tiny pieces of ordinary life. The kind you never appreciate until they're gone. When I arrived home, darkness had already settled across the neighborhood. The porch light flickered once before stabilizing. Another thing Harold never got around to fixing. I walked inside and stood quietly in the entryway. The house greeted me with familiar sounds. The refrigerator humming. The grandfather clock ticking. The air conditioner cycling on somewhere down the hallway. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Yet somehow, everything felt different. As though the walls themselves had overheard Robert's conversation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I gave up pretending. I wrapped a cardigan around my shoulders and walked downstairs. The kitchen felt cool beneath my bare feet. Moonlight spilled through the windows. For a long time, I sat at the table staring into darkness. Eventually, my eyes drifted toward the hallway. Toward Harold's office. The room sat exactly as he left it. Mostly because I never had the heart to change it. His desk. His bookshelf. His filing cabinets. His favorite reading lamp. A room. Preserved like a photograph. Slowly I stood. Then I walked inside. The office smelled faintly of paper and dust.
A familiar smell.
Comforting. I switched on the desk lamp. Soft yellow light filled the room. The rest of the house remained dark. Quiet. Still. I opened the filing cabinet again. The same one I'd searched earlier. This time, I wasn't looking for memories. I was looking for answers. Harold believed in paperwork. Not because he loved paperwork. Because he distrusted people. Not in a cynical way. In a practical way. Trust is wonderful, he used to say. Documentation is better. At the time, I rolled my eyes. Now, I silently thanked him. The cabinet contained decades of records. Tax documents. Investment reports. Insurance policies. Property assessments. Estate planning paperwork. Folder after folder. Year after year. I spent nearly 2 hours reading. The deeper I looked, the more I discovered. Not scandals. Patterns. And patterns tell stories. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I found a folder labeled Estate Planning Updates. The date caught my attention immediately. 18 months before Harold died. I opened it. Inside sat meeting notes from conversations between Harold and his attorney, Howard Mills, a name I had not heard in years. Howard handled most of Harold's legal matters.
Trustworthy.
Careful. Boring. Exactly the kind of lawyer Harold respected. I flipped through several pages. Then froze. One sentence had been highlighted. Not by Harold. By Howard. The note read, Client expressed concern regarding potential future financial pressure on surviving spouse from family members. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. The room seemed to grow smaller. Family members. Not strangers. Not scammers. Family. Another note appeared several pages later. This one handwritten. Harold's handwriting.
Strong. Precise. Familiar.
The words hit me harder than I expected. Evelyn believes the best about people. Protect her when I'm gone. I closed my eyes. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe properly. Not because I was shocked. Because I felt seen. Even now. Even years after his death. Harold had understood something about me that I spent my entire life refusing to understand myself. I wanted everyone to be good. I wanted love to be enough. I wanted family loyalty to exist simply because family existed. Harold never stopped believing in people. But he never stopped watching them either. A tear finally slipped down my cheek. The first one in weeks. Not for Daniel. Not for Melissa. Not even for Tyler. For Harold. For the man who saw the storm long before I noticed the clouds. The next morning, I called Grace. She answered immediately. What's wrong? I laughed softly. Only close friends skip hello. I need a favor. What kind of favor? I need Howard Mills' phone number. Silence. Then, oh. Just one word. But she understood. An hour later, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow sticky note containing Howard's number. I stared at it. My finger hovered above the phone. Part of me still didn't want to make the call. because calls like that change things. Once you start looking for the truth, you lose the comfort of uncertainty. Yet another part of me already knew. The uncertainty was gone. Only confirmation remained. I dialed. The receptionist answered. Polite. Professional. After a brief hold, a familiar voice came onto the line. Evelyn. I blinked.
He remembered me.
After all these years. Howard. It's good to hear your voice. I almost laughed at the irony, because nothing about this felt good. We exchanged pleasantries.
Health.
Retirement. Arizona heat. The sort of conversation older people use to delay difficult subjects. Finally, Howard spoke first. Evelyn.
His voice changed. Careful now.
Measured. Something tells me this isn't a social call. I stared out the kitchen window. The roses needed watering. A hummingbird darted briefly across the yard. Life continued. As always. I think my family may be planning something. Silence. Not surprise. Silence. And suddenly my stomach dropped, because it sounded like he had expected this call. Howard exhaled slowly. Evelyn. Yes. I think we should meet in person. The words landed heavily. Not because of what he said. Because of what he didn't.
No reassurance. No dismissal.
No. You're imagining things. No. I'm sure it's nothing. Just, we should meet. My heart began beating harder. Howard. His voice softened. Tomorrow afternoon. Another pause. Then, bring any concerns you have. Concerns. Such a polite word. For betrayal. After we ended the call, I sat motionless for several minutes. The kitchen felt unusually quiet. Even the clock seemed louder.
Tick, tick, tick.
Like a countdown. That afternoon, Melissa texted unexpectedly. The first message in nearly 2 weeks. Hope you're doing okay, red heart. I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. We should all have dinner soon. Dinner. Interesting timing. Very interesting. The message sat there glowing softly. For the first time, I didn't rush to answer. Didn't feel relieved. Didn't feel grateful. Instead, I noticed something. The timing. Howard. Robert. The questions about my house. The sudden friendliness. The invitation. The concern. The hearts and smiley faces. Every piece suddenly felt connected. I typed a short reply. Maybe next week. Then I set the phone down. Face down. For once. Outside, sunlight moved slowly across Harold's roses. The same roses he planted 20 years earlier. The same roses Melissa once admired while calculating property values. The same roses Daniel hadn't helped prune since Harold died. I watched them sway gently in the afternoon breeze. Then I looked toward the hallway where Harold's office waited quietly. Tomorrow, I would meet Howard. Tomorrow, I suspected I would finally learn whether my fears were paranoia or proof. And deep down, for the first time, I already knew which answer was waiting for me. The next afternoon, I arrived at Howard Mill's office 10 minutes early. Old habits. Harold used to say that if you arrived exactly on time, you were already late. The law office sat in a quiet brick building near downtown Phoenix. Nothing flashy. No glass towers.
No marble lobby.
Just a modest sign beside the entrance and a small parking lot shaded by mesquite trees. I sat in my car for a moment before going inside. The Arizona sun shimmered against the windshield. My hands rested on the steering wheel. Steady. At least they looked steady. Inside was another story. Because deep down, I already knew something. You don't schedule urgent meetings with attorneys because everything is fine. You schedule them because some part of you already suspects the truth. The receptionist greeted me warmly. Mrs. Parker? I nodded. Mr. Mills is expecting you. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and old books. For some reason, that comforted me. Howard always preferred practical things. Practical furniture. Practical offices. Practical advice. The exact opposite of Melissa. When Howard entered the waiting room, he looked older than I remembered. Not frail. Just seasoned. Silver hair.
Wide-rimmed glasses.
Kind eyes. The kind of eyes that had delivered good news and bad news for 40 years. Evelyn. He smiled gently. It's good to see you. Something about his voice almost broke me. Not because it was emotional, because it wasn't, because it was real. And after weeks of manipulation, real kindness feels dangerous. His office hadn't changed much. Bookshelves lined the walls. Legal files sat neatly stacked. A framed photo of Howard and Harold on a golf course stood behind the desk. The sight of it tightened my chest immediately. Harold was laughing in the picture, head thrown back, sunlight on his face.
Alive.
Howard noticed me looking. He cheated. I blinked. What? Howard smiled faintly. Golf. Harold cheated. For the first time in days, I laughed. A genuine laugh.
Short.
Unexpected. Painful. Because laughter always reminds you of who is missing. We sat. Howard folded his hands together and waited, not speaking, allowing me to begin. The silence stretched. Then I told him everything. The tuition payment, the ignored calls, the retirement communities, Melissa's comments, Grace's story, Robert's warning, the leadership ceremony, the missing seat, the conversations about my house. Everything. Howard listened carefully, never interrupting, never correcting, just listening. When I finished, the room fell silent. Howard removed his glasses slowly, then rubbed the bridge of his nose. Not a good sign. Not at all. Evelyn. His voice was gentle. Too gentle. And suddenly my stomach tightened. Because I knew. Before he spoke another word. I knew. There's something I need to tell you. The room seemed unusually quiet. Even the air conditioning sounded distant. What is it? Howard hesitated. A man choosing his next words carefully. The way doctors do. The way lawyers do. The way people do when the truth hurts. About 4 months ago, Daniel contacted my office. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. Daniel? Howard nodded. Yes. A cold feeling spread through my chest.
Slow. Steady.
Unmistakable. He requested information regarding power of attorney procedures.
I stared at him, not speaking.
Not breathing properly. Just staring. Power of attorney. The words sounded clinical, harmless, responsible, until you understand what they mean. Control.
Authority.
Access. Decisions. He said he was concerned about future care planning. Future care planning. Another polished phrase. Another carefully packaged lie. My voice sounded distant when I finally spoke. What exactly did he ask? Howard opened a file. Not my file. A separate file.
Prepared.
Waiting. He asked about transferring property ownership into family-managed trusts. My pulse quickened. Howard continued. He asked how medical authority typically works if elderly parents begin struggling with memory issues. Memory issues. The phrase hit harder than everything else. Harder than the money. Harder than the house. Harder than the lies. Because it wasn't greed. It was erasure. I sat completely still. Howard watched me carefully, giving me time. Finally, I asked, did he say I had memory problems? Howard hesitated. That hesitation answered the question. Melissa mentioned concerns. The room became very quiet. So quiet I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway outside the office.
Tick, tick, tick.
I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd, cruel, predictable, and somehow deeply ordinary. After a certain age, people stop seeing women. Then they stop listening. Then they start discussing your future as though you aren't present. Melissa had skipped straight to the final stage. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, veins visible, age spots. The hands that packed Daniel's lunches. The hands that held Tyler when he was a baby. The hands that signed away $38,400. The hands they were now quietly trying to remove from their own life. Howard opened another folder. This one older.
Worn. Familiar.
Harold worried about this possibility. My head lifted immediately. What do you mean? Howard slid several pages across the desk. Estate planning notes. Meeting summaries. Handwritten instructions. Harold's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The same handwriting from the sticky note. The same handwriting from birthday cards. The same handwriting from grocery lists. Howard pointed to one section. Your husband specifically instructed me to notify you immediately if any family member attempted to pursue legal authority over your finances, property, or medical decisions without your direct consent. My eyes moved across the page, then stopped. Another handwritten note. Harold's words. Simple.
Direct.
Painfully accurate. Daniel loves his family, but he fears disappointment more than he values courage. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. Daniel loves his family. That part was true. I knew it was. Somewhere beneath everything, my son still loved me. In the way frightened people love. Conveniently. Conditionally. From a safe distance. The second part hurt more. He fears disappointment more than he values courage. Suddenly, dozens of memories rearranged themselves, like puzzle pieces. Every time Melissa crossed a line, Daniel stayed quiet. Every time she excluded me, Daniel avoided conflict. Every time she manipulated a situation, Daniel chose peace. Not because he agreed, because resistance required courage. And courage had never been my son's strongest quality. A painful realization settled over me. Melissa may have been driving the car, but Daniel kept handing her the keys. Howard leaned forward slightly. Evelyn. I looked up. I want to be very clear.
His voice hardened.
Professional now. Certain. No legal action has been taken. Relief flickered. Briefly. Everything remains under your control. The sentence landed heavily. Under your control.
For now.
Howard studied me carefully. Then asked the question nobody else had. What do you want to do? I looked toward the window.
The
afternoon sun burned bright against the city skyline. Traffic moved below. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. For weeks I had been asking, why are they doing this? How long has this been happening? What are they planning? Now, the questions had changed. What am I going to do about it? And for the first time since paying Tyler's debt, I already knew the answer. I was done waiting to be chosen. Done waiting for phone calls. Done waiting for invitations. Done waiting for proof that I mattered. They had spent months preparing for a future where my voice no longer mattered. A future where my house became theirs. A future where my money became theirs. A future where my decisions became theirs. What they didn't understand was simple. Harold had spent 43 years teaching me something I had only just learned. Kindness and surrender are not the same thing. When I finally stood to leave Howard's office, he handed me a thick folder. My folder. My finances. My protections. My future. Outside, the Arizona sunlight felt different somehow. Sharper. Clearer. The fear wasn't gone. The heartbreak wasn't gone. The loneliness certainly wasn't gone. But something else had arrived. Something stronger. Clarity. And as I walked toward my car, I realized something that sent a chill through me. Daniel, Melissa, even Tyler. They still believed I didn't know, which meant they were about to make a very dangerous mistake. They were about to show me exactly how far they were willing to go. The drive home from Howard's office was quiet. The desert air was still warm despite the late afternoon sun, and the sky had begun its slow transformation from gold to a deep, bruised purple. I rolled down the car window just enough to feel the faint breeze, letting it stir the edges of my cardigan. For the first time in weeks, I didn't rush to check my phone. I didn't want distractions. I didn't want to hear anything from them. Once inside the house, I went straight to the office. The folders Howard had handed me rested on the desk. I opened them carefully, spreading the papers across the surface. Bank statements, investment summaries, property records, retirement accounts, and insurance. Policies. Every sheet told a story. Every number had a history. And now, every number had a question. Who had been manipulating it all along? I started with the tuition payment. My fingers hovered over the transfer confirmation. $38,400. A number I remembered vividly. Yet something in my memory didn't align. I had asked Tyler about his balance months earlier. I remembered it being closer to $12,000. I logged into the university portal. My hands trembled slightly as I typed. Tyler's account opened. The numbers confirmed my suspicions. Tuition owed, $11,820. My payment had overshot the actual remaining balance by more than $26,000. I leaned back in my chair. Silence filled the room. The fan in the ceiling hummed softly, ordinary. But the revelation was anything but ordinary. Every transfer, every payment, every financial interaction with the family had been carefully curated. Not a mistake. Not generosity, unappreciated. Strategy. Calculation. I rechecked every detail line by line. Part of the money had gone toward tuition. The rest had been transferred into a linked account managed by Daniel. His name appeared beside it. I closed my eyes. My chest tightened. The betrayal wasn't subtle. It was brazen, yet quiet, polite, almost invisible to anyone else. For the first time, anger crept in. Not loud, not explosive. Cold. Methodical. The kind of anger that demands attention without raising a voice. My mind replayed every interaction, every polite smile, every feigned concern about my well-being. Every moment now took on new meaning. Dinner that night was quiet. I reheated frozen lasagna and ate at the kitchen counter. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint scent of creosote from the distant hills. The silence was not empty. It was deliberate. I thought of Tyler at the rooftop restaurant with Melissa and Daniel. I thought of all the times I had believed in their smiles, in their words. I realized that every smile, every word, had been carefully measured to manipulate me, to extract value without giving anything in return. I remembered the yellow sticky note in Harold's handwriting. Love them, but watch patterns carefully. At the time, it had seemed a gentle warning. Now it felt like a command, a strategy. Harold had seen this long before I had. He had known. I pulled every financial folder from the office cabinet. Tax returns, retirement statements, bank transfers, investment accounts, insurance policies. I spread everything across the dining room table. Sunlight stretched across the papers while the ceiling fan hummed overhead. I reviewed every account meticulously, every number, every date. Patterns emerged clearly now. Gifts, loans, payments. All of them funneled to one purpose, their gain. I picked up the tuition account statements again. The discrepancy was glaring. The excess funds had not gone to Tyler. They had gone into Daniel's controlled account. My hands stayed steady, surprisingly steady. The shock remained, but beneath it was clarity, a quiet, precise understanding of the situation. Howard's words echoed in my mind. They may believe grief has made you vulnerable. What they may not realize is that grief can make you pay closer attention. I was paying attention now, not out of panic, not out of fear, not yet, but I was noticing, calculating, observing, like a chess player who sees 3 moves ahead. I had spent decades giving, sacrificing, believing, and now, for the first time, I understood that observation was as important as generosity. I printed copies of every record, bank transfers, tuition statements, investment accounts, tax documents. Each printed page was placed in a manila folder. I sat back, hands folded, eyes on the stack. Each piece of paper was proof, evidence, confirmation of the patterns I had begun to see months ago, during small humiliations, ignored calls, and quiet exclusions. And now the power had shifted. Not for revenge, not for vengeance, but for clarity, knowledge, control. Howard had given me the tools. Harold had given me the foresight. The family had given me the motive. I let the silence settle around me. Crickets chirped faintly outside. Pool lights reflected softly against the water. The house, once a vessel of manipulation, now felt like a fortress. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't lashing out. I was preparing, quietly, calmly. Tomorrow, I would begin the next step. Observation, verification, patience. The quiet counterattack that would reclaim what had been quietly stolen. Not in anger, not in spectacle, but with the precision of someone who had waited long enough to understand every pattern, every subtle move, every hidden motive. And for the first time in months, I slept that night with a sense of purpose. Because I knew the game had just begun. 3 days after discovering the truth about the tuition money, the invitations began. Not formal invitations. Not handwritten cards. The modern version. Texts.
Calls.
Sudden concern. The kind of attention that appears only after access to something valuable feels threatened. Funny how quickly people remember your existence when they suspect they might lose control of it. The first message came from Melissa.
Hope you're doing okay.
Haven't heard from you in a while, red heart. I stared at the screen while standing at the kitchen sink washing strawberries. The message might have fooled me a month earlier. Now I could almost see the calculation behind every word. Not, I miss you. Not, how are you feeling? Just enough concern to reopen a door. I set the phone face down and continued rinsing fruit. No response. For once, silence belonged to me. The next morning Daniel called. I watched his name flash across the screen.
Ring, ring, ring.
Voicemail. 20 minutes later, he called again. Then Tyler. Then Melissa. By evening, four missed calls sat on my phone. For weeks, I had carried that phone through every room of my house hoping for exactly this. Now that it was happening, I felt strangely calm. Almost detached. Like someone watching rain through a window after surviving a flood. That night, I listened to the voicemails. Melissa first. Her voice sounded sweet. Almost fragile. Evelyn, we received some paperwork from Howard's office, and we're a little confused. I think there may be some misunderstanding. Call me when you get a chance. Misunderstanding. Such a polite word for panic. Daniel's message came next.
No wodems.
No concern. No questions about my health. Straight to business. Mom, before you make any major financial decisions, maybe we should all sit down together and talk. Together. Interesting. For months they excluded me from together. Now suddenly together mattered again. The final voicemail came from Tyler. Hey Grandma, call me back when you can. Just that.
No explanation. No apology.
Nothing. I deleted none of them. But I didn't answer. The following afternoon, I met Grace for coffee. The cafe overlooked a small lake in Scottsdale where ducks drifted lazily across the water. The weather had finally cooled enough for outdoor seating. Grace took one look at me and smiled. You look different. I laughed softly. Older?
No.
She stirred cream into her coffee. Stronger. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Grace leaned forward. They called me. I blinked. Who? Melissa. Of course. I wasn't surprised. Melissa always worked indirectly. She preferred influence over confrontation. Control over honesty. Grace shook her head. She asked whether I'd heard from you. And I told her I wasn't your social secretary. A genuine smile escaped me. The first real one in days. Grace smiled back. Then her expression softened. Evelyn. Yes. They're scared. The words settled between us. Simple. Accurate. Powerful. Because she was right. For the first time since Harold died, they were losing visibility into my life. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know what Howard knew. And they certainly didn't know what I was planning. People who depend on control become uncomfortable when they lose information. That evening, I sat on the patio with one of Harold's old photo albums. The sun dipped behind the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the pool. The water reflected orange and gold light across the patio stones. I turned pages slowly. Family vacations. Christmas mornings. Birthdays.
Ordinari moments.
Then I found a photograph that stopped me. Tyler. 8 years old. Sitting beside Harold beneath the patio umbrella. A chessboard between them. Both laughing. On the back of the photo, Harold had written something. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Teach people how to love you. I stared at those words for a long time.
For
most of my life, I thought love meant endless forgiveness, patience, sacrifice, availability. But somewhere along the way, I had accidentally taught my family something dangerous. I had taught them that I would always stay, always give, always understand, always absorb disappointment without consequence. And people rarely value what they believe cannot leave. The realization hurt, but it also clarified everything. Because this situation was no longer about money. Not really. It was about value, respect, boundaries. The difference between being loved and being used. The next morning, Howard called. Everything is ready. I knew immediately what he meant. The trust documents, the estate changes, the protections, the future. We met later that afternoon. Howard reviewed everything carefully. No family member would gain authority over my finances. No family member would gain automatic medical control. The house would remain protected. Independent oversight would manage everything.
No shortcuts. No surprises. No manipulation.
Then came the hardest conversation. Tyler. I stared out Howard's office window while traffic moved below. I don't know what to do about him. Howard remained silent, listening, waiting, exactly like Harold used to. He isn't Melissa.
No.
He isn't Daniel.
No.
I sighed, but he still benefited. Howard nodded slowly. Yes. That single word carried enormous weight, because it was true. Tyler wasn't the architect, but he had accepted the advantages, accepted the money, accepted the distance, accepted the silence. Convenience isn't innocence. That realization hurt almost as much as the financial betrayal itself. Before leaving, I handed Howard a sealed envelope. Tyler's name was written neatly across the front. Only Tyler. No one else. Howard looked down at it, then at me. You want me to hold on to this? I nodded. Until after I'm gone. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Howard carefully placed the envelope inside a folder. No questions.
No judgment.
Just respect. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Melissa. Another text. Tyler says he misses you. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it arrived exactly 48 hours after they learned their access to my future might be changing. Interesting timing. Very interesting timing. I did not answer. Instead, I turned off my phone completely. Not silent mode. Off. The screen went black. The house became quiet. Truly quiet. For the first time in months, the silence felt peaceful. Not lonely. Peaceful. There is a difference. Loneliness is waiting for someone. Peace is realizing you no longer need to. That night, I cooked a proper dinner. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, a small baked potato. Nothing fancy. Just food prepared for myself. Not leftovers. Not frozen meals. Not survival.
Care.
After dinner, I sat in Harold's recliner. The same chair where he spent countless evenings reading newspapers and pretending not to fall asleep during documentaries. The house settled around me. Wood creaked softly. The grandfather clock ticked steadily. Outside, crickets sang beneath the desert night. For the first time in a very long time, I stopped thinking about what my family might do next. Instead, I thought about what I wanted next. And that question felt surprisingly unfamiliar. Because mothers spend so many years asking what everyone else needs. Eventually they forget to ask themselves. Near midnight, I walked through the house turning off lights. The guest room, the office, the kitchen. Each room carried memories. But for the first time, those memories no longer felt like anchors. They felt like evidence. Proof that a good life had existed here. Proof that Harold and I had built something meaningful. Proof that I was more than a bank account, more than a house, more than an inheritance waiting to happen. As I climbed into bed, another realization arrived. Quiet.
Uncertain. Cold.
Daniel, Melissa, even Tyler, still believed they had time. Time to explain. Time to persuade. Time to regain influence. Time to manage me. What none of them understood was simple. The woman who had spent months begging silently for attention was gone. And the woman replacing her was finally paying attention. The days that followed were quiet, but the quiet was different now. It wasn't empty or lonely. It carried weight, intention, and observation.
I
spent my mornings at the kitchen table reviewing the stacks of documents Howard had prepared. Bank statements, trust papers, property records, tuition transfers, retirement accounts. Each sheet confirmed what I already suspected. I had been underestimated, undervalued. And now, finally, I had clarity. I began keeping a small notebook beside me. Every call I received, every message, every unusual word choice from Daniel, Melissa, or even Tyler went in the notebook.
Dates. Times.
Phrases, actions, patterns, observations. I recorded what they did not realize I was noticing. By midweek, I had developed a system. The folders were organized. The account discrepancies marked. Each transaction and financial record lined up with moments of silence, subtle manipulations, and concerned messages. I could predict their behavior before it happened, and for the first time in months, that sense of control felt like relief. Friday morning, I made a ritual of walking through the house. Every room, every corner, every hallway. The guest room where Tyler's towels lay folded. The office with Harold's papers. The living room with his recliner. The kitchen with a coffee maker still humming. I touched each item, slowly, deliberately. A grandmother's blessing on the space she had built with her husband, and on her own life. Later that afternoon, I received another text from Melissa.
We should talk this weekend.
Family dinner. Everyone present. I read it twice. The timing was deliberate, convenient. It had an undertone of urgency, designed to test me. I did not respond. Not yet. Instead, I took my notebook and began reviewing every previous invitation, every dinner, every sudden concern. The patterns were clear. Melissa wanted to see if I would still come. Daniel wanted to gauge my reaction. Tyler likely had no idea what was happening, but he would follow his parents' lead. The realization was subtle, but powerful. They had not considered the possibility that I was watching, that I was calculating, that I was prepared. Saturday morning arrived. The sun was bright, the desert sky a pale blue stretching endlessly. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, inhaled its aroma, and sat at the table. With my notebook open, each line of observation felt like armor. I reread Harold's old sticky notes. Teach people how to love you. His words had guided me through decades, but now they carried a new meaning. It was no longer about teaching Tyler. It was about teaching them all, Daniel, Melissa, Tyler, that my presence was not something to manipulate, purchase, or erase. By mid-morning, I began preparing the house for the dinner. Not for them, not to please them, but for myself. The patio chairs aligned. The table cleared. Fresh flowers cut from the garden. I arranged the roses Harold had planted, noticing each bud, each thorn, the way the leaves caught the light. I wanted the house to reflect me. Calm, deliberate, observed, untouchable. When the doorbell rang that evening, I was ready. Melissa opened the door, the practiced smile plastered across her face. Evelyn, you look wonderful, she said, voice warm. I returned the smile, measured. Thank you. Please come in. Daniel appeared behind her, polite but slightly tense. Tyler followed, casual but uneasy. They were performing their roles. Concerned family, attentive hosts, gracious guests. The problem was I had rewritten the script. I was no longer playing the part they expected. We gathered in the dining room. They led me to my chair, the same seat Harold and I always reserved for me. I nodded politely. Saturday. And waited. Dinner began. Conversation was carefully curated. Melissa asked about my health. Daniel asked about the garden. Tyler talked about school. The words were familiar, the tones polite, but I noticed every pause, every glance, every slight hesitation. The choreography of their control had cracks, and I was watching. When dessert arrived, Melissa placed a lemon tart in front of me. A little something from your favorite bakery, she said, voice sweet. I lifted the tart, considered it, and smiled faintly. Not because I was fooled, not because I was pleased. Because small kindnesses, real or staged, are best acknowledged on your own terms. Later, while the three of them talked, I retrieved the manila folder from my bag. Inside were the tuition statements, the bank transfer confirmations, and the meticulously organized records of the past few months. I didn't wave them in the air. I didn't accuse. I simply reviewed them, quietly, while listening to their voices. The power had shifted. Not dramatically,
Not publicly.
but it had shifted. Every movement, every word, every polite concern they offered now existed under the scrutiny of someone who knew. By the time dinner ended, I had decided my next steps. They would not notice yet. They would continue their performances, oblivious to the fact that I had already observed, recorded, and begun quietly reclaiming what was mine. That night, as I washed the dishes and listened to the desert wind rustle the palm trees, I realized something profound. They believed they were guiding me, directing me, managing me.
But the game had changed.
And I was no longer the piece to be moved. The first person to crack was not Melissa. It was Daniel. That surprised me. For years, I had assumed Melissa was the stronger one, the strategist, the planner, the woman always thinking 3 steps ahead. And perhaps she was. But Daniel was the one carrying something much heavier.
Guilt.
And guilt is difficult to hide forever. 3 days after the family dinner, he called. Not a text. Not a voicemail. A call. The kind people make when they can no longer tolerate uncertainty. I was sitting on the back patio when my phone rang. The late afternoon sun reflected across the pool. Harold's roses swayed gently beside the fence. For a moment, I simply watched the screen. Daniel. Then I answered.
Mum.
His voice sounded tired.
Not busy.
Not distracted. Tired. Hello, Daniel. Silence. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that appears when 2 people know they are discussing one thing while pretending to discuss another. Finally, he cleared his throat. How have you been? I almost smiled. Not because the question was sincere. Because it arrived 4 months too late. I'm doing well. Another pause. Then, Melissa says you've been distant. There it was. Not concern. Observation. I leaned back in my chair. The desert breeze moved softly through the yard. Have I? Daniel sighed. You know what I mean. I don't think I do. More silence. I could almost hear him searching for safer words. Safer territory. A way to approach the subject without naming it. The same thing he'd done his entire life. Avoid.
Delay. Deflect.
Finally, he spoke. Mom, Howard contacted us. There it was. The truth.
At last.
No more pretending. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the most honest response. Daniel continued. He told us some things had changed. Some things. Interesting. Not your estate. Not your trust. Not your finances. Just some things. As though reducing reality might make it less threatening. I see. My voice remained calm. Steady. The way Harold always sounded when someone else was emotional. Daniel exhaled heavily. I just wish you would have talked to us first. The sentence hit me so hard I almost laughed.
Talk to us first.
For weeks I had called, texted, waited, visited, reached out. And now suddenly communication mattered. Talk to you. Yes. I stared at the water, at the tiny ripples moving across the surface. Daniel, I spent 2 months trying to talk to you. The silence that followed felt different. Not defensive. Wounded. Because he knew it was true. Mom.
No.
For the first time, I interrupted. Not angrily. Not loudly. Firmly. You don't get to be upset about communication. He didn't answer. The breeze shifted. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Life continued. As it always does during moments that permanently change relationships. Finally, Daniel spoke again. Lower now. Less certain. You really think we'd hurt you? There it was. The question beneath every other question. The one he was afraid to ask. The one he already knew the answer to. I closed my eyes. Not because I was angry. Because I was tired. Tired of pretending intentions matter more than actions. Daniel. Yeah, you already did. The line went silent. Completely silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard something unexpected. Not anger. Not frustration. A shaky breath. The kind people take when they're trying very hard not to cry. And suddenly I saw him again. Not the 46-year-old man. The little boy. The boy who scraped his knee learning to ride a bike. The boy who climbed into our bed after nightmares. The boy Harold carried on his shoulders at Disneyland. That boy still existed somewhere beneath everything else, which somehow made this worse. Because betrayal hurts most when it comes from someone who once loved you properly. Mom, his voice cracked slightly. I never wanted this. I believed him. That was the tragedy. I actually believed him. Melissa wanted the outcome. Daniel simply allowed it. Again, and again, and again, until permission and participation became indistinguishable. You never stopped it either. The words landed softly, yet somehow harder than anything else I had said. Daniel didn't argue, because he couldn't. Eventually he whispered, I know. Those 2 words changed everything. Not enough to fix it, not enough to undo it, but enough to matter. Because for the first time, someone in that family had told the truth. After we hung up, I sat outside for nearly an hour, watching sunlight disappear across the yard, watching shadows lengthen, watching evening arrive. The conversation left me strangely sad. Not victorious. Not satisfied.
Sad.
Because the fantasy every mother carries is simple. One day your child will understand. One day they'll see clearly. One day they'll choose you. Real life is messy, eh? Sometimes understanding arrives after the damage, after the neglect, after the betrayal, after trust has already broken. And understanding is not the same as repair. That realization stayed with me for several days. Then Saturday morning arrived, along with Tyler. The knock came just after 9. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my grandson stood there holding a cardboard box. For a moment neither of us spoke. The morning sun illuminated the driveway behind him. He looked exhausted, older somehow, less polished, less certain. Grandma. I stepped aside. He entered quietly. The box remained in his hands. He carried it into the kitchen and placed it on the table, then stepped back. What is this? Tyler swallowed. The movement looked painful. I sold some things. I frowned slightly. What things? My watch.
Pause.
My gaming setup. Another pause. My concert tickets. He looked down. A few other things.
I
stared at him,
confused.
Then he pushed the box toward me. Inside sat stacks of cash, neatly bundled,
organized, counted.
My chest tightened, not because of the money, because I understood immediately. Tyler. His eyes remained lowered. I can't pay all of it back. The words emerged quietly, broken, honest. I know that. Silence. Then, but I needed to start. For a long moment neither of us moved. The kitchen felt impossibly still. The same kitchen where I had once waited for his phone calls. The same kitchen where I paid off his debt. The same kitchen where my heart broke. Now my grandson stood before me carrying something much heavier than money. Responsibility. And responsibility always costs something. Finally he looked up. His eyes were red. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just tired. I was awful to you. The confession arrived without excuses. Without qualifications. Without blaming anyone else. I knew you were calling. My heart sank. Because that was the answer I had feared most. I saw the messages. His voice shook. I kept thinking I'd call tomorrow. Another pause. Then tomorrow became next week. The truth. Simple. Ugly.
Common.
Not cruelty. Convenience. And convenience destroys relationships every day. A tear slipped down his cheek. He wiped it away immediately. Embarrassed. Still 19. Still trying to look strong. I didn't think about what it felt like for you. The sentence hurt more than any lie. Because it was probably true. Young people rarely wake up intending to hurt older people. They simply stop thinking about them. And neglect creates wounds just as deep as malice. I looked at the box. Then at Tyler. Then toward the window. Harold would have known exactly what to say. I didn't. So I chose honesty. Tyler. Yeah. I forgive you. Relief flooded his face instantly. Then I continued. But things are still different now. The relief vanished. Slowly. Painfully. Because this was the lesson nobody teaches children. Forgiveness and restoration are not the same thing. Some bridges survive repair. Others remain damaged forever. And both outcomes are real. Tyler nodded slowly. Tears filled his eyes again. This time he didn't hide them. For several minutes we sat together in silence. The kind of silence family shares when words are too small. Outside, Harold's roses moved gently in the breeze. Inside, the grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm.
Tick, tick, tick.
Life moving forward, as it always does. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized something. The money had never been the real loss. The real loss was trust. And unlike money, trust never returns in full once it has been spent. Part 12. The morning after Tyler's visit was calm. Almost eerily calm. The house felt like it had exhaled after months of tension, manipulation, and silent strategizing. I moved slowly through each room, checking the roses Harold had planted, the kitchen counters polished and cleared, the living room where sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors. I carried with me a new sense of clarity, one I hadn't felt since Howard had handed me the folders, since Robert had warned me, since Grace had confirmed my suspicions. I was no longer waiting for acknowledgement. I was no longer waiting for attention. I was observing, controlling, and protecting. That afternoon, the phone rang. Melissa. I didn't answer. Daniel called next. I let it ring. Tyler's name flashed across the screen twice in a row. I let those calls ring too. For months, I had chased their voices. Now, I let the silence speak for me. Instead, I turned to the paperwork Howard had organized. The trust, the estate, the protections. Every detail confirmed my authority. Every clause reaffirmed that no one, Daniel, Melissa, or Tyler, could take control without my direct consent. The act was quiet, almost invisible.
No confrontation. No spectacle.
Just strategy. And the power in strategy is quiet, deliberate, and deeply satisfying. By evening, the family's calls slowed. The first tentative texts arrived again. Short, polite, testing the boundaries. But I did not respond.
Not yet.
Dinner was a simple affair. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, baked potato. Nothing extravagant. Nothing to impress. I ate alone at the kitchen counter. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint scent of creosote and distant blooms. The pool reflected the twilight. Sky in gentle ripples. Silence stretched around the house like a protective blanket. That night, I carried a box of old photographs down from the attic. Harold holding Daniel on his shoulders at Disneyland. Tyler grinning beside birthday cakes with missing front teeth. Christmas mornings. Graduation ceremonies. Ordinary moments that once felt like love, now felt like lessons. I turned the pages slowly until a photograph stopped me. Tyler, age 8, sitting beside Harold on the patio laughing over a chessboard. Written across the back in Harold's handwriting were 5 simple words: teach people how to love you.
I held the photo for a long time.
The house was silent. The crickets outside chirped softly. The pool lights reflected against the patio stones. For the first time in months, I did not reach for my phone. I did not check messages. I did not worry about their next move. I realized I had been silent for too long, but now my silence had weight. My attention was deliberate. My presence was purposeful. 3 days later, the calls started again. First Melissa, then Daniel, then Tyler, twice. They had discovered something. My access was no longer negotiable. My authority, my decisions, my boundaries, they could no longer manipulate them with polite smiles or carefully timed concern. I let every call ring, every message go unanswered. I watched the desert light change through the windows. I let the silence stretch, teaching them the lesson they had forgotten. Control is not granted. It is observed, earned, and respected. Melissa left a message. Evelyn, we got some confusing paperwork from Howard Mills today. I think there must be a misunderstanding about your accounts. A misunderstanding. 20 minutes later, Daniel left a voicemail. Mom, before you make any major financial decisions, maybe we should sit down together as a family. As a family. I sat at the patio table listening to their voices echo through the house. Months ago, I would have answered eagerly, ran to the phone, begged for acknowledgement. Now I simply sat,
Observed.
waited. Weeks passed. The calls, the texts, the emails, they all became predictable, carefully monitored. I responded on my terms,
Slowly.
deliberately, quietly. My home, once a target for manipulation, became a sanctuary, a space of calm, clarity, and control. The house no longer felt like a burden. It felt like mine. The roses bloomed. The pool reflected the sky. The grandfather clock ticked steadily. I could finally breathe. Not in anticipation, not in fear, but in presence. Tyler eventually visited again. This time, without prompting. We sat together in the living room, sharing coffee and memories. He apologized for the months of distance, not with excuses, but with honest words. He acknowledged my sacrifice, my presence, and my authority. It was not a restoration of everything. It was not forgiveness that erased the past, but it was recognition, a small, quiet acknowledgement that mattered more than any financial transaction or polite performance. Melissa and Daniel eventually adjusted their approach. The calls became respectful, the messages thoughtful. I observed. I responded, slowly, deliberately. The balance of power had shifted. That night, after everyone had left, I carried another photo album downstairs, sat cross-legged on the living room rug, turned pages carefully. Memories of Harold, memories of family, ordinary moments that had taught extraordinary lessons. I closed the album,
Turned off my phone.
and for the first time in many months, I slept peacefully. The house was quiet. The roses swayed gently outside. The pool reflected the moonlight. And I realized something I had known all along. The true power of family lies not in money, control, or obligation. It lies in attention, observation, and the quiet strength to protect oneself. I had survived the betrayal. I had reclaimed my dignity. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt entirely mine.